Well, good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank everyone for their flexibility. I call this hearing to order, and a quorum is present. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. I want to welcome all members and witnesses to today's Oversight Investigation Subcommittee hearing, which is creating a welcoming VA and building equity for veterans through legislation. I'd like to quickly remind all participants of some of the items to facilitate today's virtual hearing. If you're experiencing any connectivity issues, please make sure you or your staff contact our designated technical support so those issues can be resolved as quickly as possible. Members should continue to remain visible on camera for the duration of their participation in the hearing unless they experience connectivity issues or other technical problems. When you're recognized, you'll need to unmute your microphone for about 2 or 3 seconds before speaking. Pause for 2 or 3 seconds before speaking so that your words are fully captured on the live stream. And if you wish to have a document inserted into the record, please ask for unanimous consent and have your staff email it over to veteransaffairs.hearings@mail.house.gov. Any questions before we begin today's hearing? While hearing none, we'll proceed. I ask unanimous consent that Representative Rice be permitted to join today's hearing so she can speak about the legislation under consideration or related issues and legislation. Without objection, so ordered. Now recognize myself for an opening statement. Today's hearing will examine legislation to create a more equitable, inclusive, and accessible Department of Veterans Affairs. All veterans, no matter their race, gender, sexual orientation, age, or other status, should receive high-quality care and benefits earned during military service. Sadly, I continue to hear from too many constituents who are being unfairly denied such service or are feeling unwelcome at VA. I know that Congress can and should do more without delay to ensure that VA is free of bias and discrimination. Correcting these challenges is a priority for this subcommittee. In May, we held a hearing on diversity and inclusion issues facing the department's workforce. Also, the committee made progress this year by approving legislation, including the Bipartisan Protecting Moms Who Serve Act and the Improving VA Accountability to Prevent Sexual Harassment and Discrimination Act. I look forward to these and similar bills becoming law. So today we'll examine more legislation that will take important steps to ensure equity in VA programs. Frustratingly, many veterans are still denied vital benefits and services due to effects of long defunct laws and rules. Notably, today's hearing occurs 2 days after the 10th anniversary of the repeal of the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy. And although that's been repealed, this unfair policy created barriers to benefits that still exist today for thousands of veterans with other than honorable discharges due to their sexual orientation or gender identity. We can't make up for the suffering that these veterans have experienced, but it's past the time for the country to provide every benefit possible that these patriots deserve moving forward. This week, Secretary McDonough announced that VA will take steps to remove barriers that those veterans face who are still unable to access their benefits due to the remnants of this and other unfair policies, and I applaud this effort. I'm committed to working with VA and with the veteran community to untangle the complex web of benefit, eligibility, and discharge status issues that are faced by each deserving veteran. I'm proud to have introduced the Securing the Rights Our Veterans Earned or SERVE Act to end this injustice that's been done to the LGBTQ plus members of the military. This would make permanent the access to benefits that have been outlined by the Secretary. Now, members of Congress may balk at the financial cost for VA of this expansion to access benefits, but we should have been paying for these benefits for years. And if it wasn't for the anti-LGBTQ policies at DOD and VA, as a Congress, we must have the courage to fight for what is right and for what is just. In the same way, our full committee chair, Mark Takano, introduced HR 1596 to direct VA to establish a much needed commission to study historical inequities for LGBTQ plus service members and veterans, and I fully support this legislation. It's also noteworthy that Secretary McDonough's Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Access Task Force concluded its department review in July. I'm encouraged by the steps it identified to move VA toward inclusivity and equity, including improved governance, training, data collection, recruitment and retention, and veteran engagement. I think VA's strategy will require unequivocal dedication from every corner of the department to bring lasting and effective cultural change. Today, our subcommittee will hear more about this strategy and consider complementary legislation to correct injustices, ensure veterans receive the benefits they've earned, and to foster a more inclusive VA. Congress must address antiquated policies that discriminated against women veterans. HR 2385, the Justice for Women Veterans Act, directs the Government Accountability Office to examine the plight of service members forced to separate from the military because they became pregnant or parents under military policies from the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. We'll also consider legislation that ensures VA's advisory bodies are diverse and inclusive. I have a bill, HR 4845, that would establish an advisory committee on LGBTQ veterans to advise the secretary. Similarly, Ms. Delbenny's HR 3930, the Voices for Veterans Act, would expand the membership of the Advisory Committee on Minority Veterans to include LGBTQ veterans. HR 2806, the Honoring All Veterans Act, would require changes to VA's current motto to be more inclusive of all those who are served by the department. I understand Secretary McDonough has directed a review to identify a more inclusive motto, and I'd like to hear more about this review and how VA is seeking input from Congress and the veteran community on this issue. Two bills being considered would improve the quantity and quality of data to better inform its programs and services for veterans. Health Subcommittee Chair Brownlee has a bill, Every Veteran Counts Act, which would improve how the department gathers and analyzes demographic and other critical information. The VA Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Access Data Improvement Act would also improve VA's access to information, including from other federal agencies and sources. Look forward to hearing from our witnesses about these initiatives, and I'd like to turn things over to Ranking Member Mann for 5 minutes for an opening statement.
Well, thank you, Chairman Pappas, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today and providing your testimony. Before us are 8 bills that the majority believes will increase equity for veterans. I share the objective of a fair and functional VA where veterans from all walks of life have access to the health care and benefits they have rightly earned through serving our great nation. Studies and advisory committees can be useful. However, VA already has 24 advisory committees, and I'm skeptical that requiring new studies and creating a new advisory committee to examine policies all the way back to the Revolutionary War will lead to improved care for veterans who need it now. Additionally, some of the bills before us would require VA to study and analyze Department of Defense policies. I do not believe this is a proper use of the VA's time and taxpayer dollars. If any agency were to study and opine on discharge statuses and the history of military policy, it should be the DoD, Department of Defense, not the VA. The VA, I believe, shares my concerns. In written testimony, VA raised a number of issues regarding the legislation before us today, including their belief that Department of Defense should have a role in some of these provisions. I hope to hear more about that today. Additionally, I'm troubled by the apparent redundancy and impracticality of 2 draft bills on this agenda, the VA IDEA Data Act and Every Veterans Count Act. The VA IDEA Data Act would designate the VA as a statistical agency alongside the Census Bureau, the Bureau of Economic Analysis, and the Bureau of Labor Statistics. I have no doubt that the VA has untapped potential as a source of data about veterans. But data collection and analysis are not core missions for the department, and I'm concerned that putting VA into business as a statistical agency would distract from VA's core mission of caring for veterans. The Every Veterans Count Act would require VA to publish a database of aggregated information about veterans. It would write 15 extremely detailed categories of information to be collected into law. VA already conducts a national survey of veterans roughly every decade. In my opinion, Congress intervention to control the survey process is unnecessary and potentially counterproductive. This committee must be very careful when considering these policies. We need to ensure that every investment made in VA translates to improvements for the individual veteran receiving care and benefits. Also, I would note that the CERB Act may receive a mandatory score from the Congressional Budget Office. If so, I look forward to the minority identifying necessary offsets to address that score before this bill moves forward. I also have serious concerns about the equity issues presented in the CERB Act by requiring VA review some discharges but not others. I hope to learn more about that today. Finally, this past Friday, news broke that VA is changing its eligibility standards to allow for veterans given other than honorable discharges due to their sexual orientation to receive upgraded benefits that may lead to them being eligible for VA health care and some additional benefits. This change is very similar to the requirements in the CERB Act, which VA does not fully support due to quote, technical issues and numerous open questions about the applicability of the language, end quote. I agree this is a complex and technical area, but I'm focused on how VA has overcome these complexities on their own. I'm also interested to learn how these reviews will impact the ever-growing backlog of claims for disability benefits. As the saying goes, the devil's in the details, and I hope to learn much more about new policy this afternoon. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses about these bills and how we can make them better. Again, I thank everyone for being here today. And with that, Chairman Pappas, I yield back.
Well, thank you very much. I see we're joined by full committee chair Mark Takano. I'd like to recognize him for 5 minutes for any opening comments.
Thank you very much, Chairman Pappas, for recognizing me, and good afternoon. And I'm glad that the subcommittee is holding today's important legislative hearing. The bills under consideration would take much needed steps toward ensuring that every veteran feels welcome and safe at VA and is fairly treated and receives the highest quality care and benefits. Our committee continues to focus much needed attention toward the many issues that have prevented too many veterans from being treated equitably or accessing the care and benefits they've earned. This is increasingly important as our veteran population is rapidly changing, with more women, LGBTQ+, Black, Asian, Hispanic, and Native American veterans, Native veterans than ever before. I support all the bills under consideration by the subcommittee today. Each provides a solution to a narrow but ongoing or even historic shortcoming regarding inclusion, diversity, or equity, and provides additional tools needed to support ongoing goals. Let me first mention a bill that I have sponsored. Since before the founding of this country, members of the LGBTQ+ community, and especially those in the uniformed services, have been subject to myriad discriminatory practices and policies. Even as they swore to protect and defend their country, both in peacetime and in war, LGBTQ+ service members faced an additional threat from within their own ranks: the threat of humiliation, forcible discharge from service, and even violence or imprisonment for being who they were. On Monday, we observed the 10th anniversary of the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy. And though Don't Ask, Don't Tell was thought to be an advancement for LGBTQ+ members of the military at the time of its introduction, living and serving in constant fear of discovery left service members and veterans with mental scars that persist decades later. My bill, HR 1596, directs VA to establish a commission, a presidential level commission, to study such long-standing inequities for LGBTQ+ service members and veterans. The commission will identify and compile information about the history of military policy regarding LGBTQ+ and sexual orientation and gendered identity. It would hold public hearings, identify impacts of the discriminatory policies on service members, and make recommendations to remediate those effects. To avoid repeating sordid episodes from our nation's past, we must fully account and understand the breadth and depth of what transpired. And when we have identified discrimination, we must take swift action to root it out and make whole those who have been wronged. That is why I also voice my strong support for Secretary McDonough's directive to provide VA healthcare and benefits to veterans with, quote, other than honorable, end quote, discharges due to sexual orientation, gender identity, or HIV status. This directive shows me that Secretary McDonough is willing to listen to the veteran community and take direction take direct action within his authority to back up his commitment to inclusion, equity, and access. And while I support Secretary McDonough's directive, I also recognize that a more permanent solution is needed to ensure LGBTQ+ veterans are not whipsawed by a future change in VA administration. And that's why I support Chair Pappas's bill, the SERV Act, which will change existing statute to permanently extend eligibility for VA services and benefits to those who were discharged due to their sexual orientation and gender identity, including under Don't Ask, Don't Tell. Chair Pappas's bill will help these veterans access medical services, disability compensation, mental health services, and other benefits they have been deprived of, despite having fully earned them through dedicated service in the uniformed services. LGBTQ plus veterans held up their promises to serve and defend this country. Congress and VA must now do the same. There will be a financial cost to provide the earned benefits that have been denied so far to these veterans. But let me point out to my colleagues that this was a cost we willingly accepted when we accepted these patriots into the ranks of our uniformed services. We should not deny any veteran their right to earn services. The other bills before us today include those that explore the dynamics of other injustices or equip VA to be more inclusive, equitable, and accessible for all veterans. These bills will not undo years of injustice at VA, nor will they instantly create the department-wide cultural change that VA needs. But these bills are straightforward, concrete steps to remove barriers that for too long have unfairly denied veterans access to the benefits they've earned. I am encouraged by what we have seen so far from Secretary McDonough this year, and I look forward to receiving updates on the progress of implementing his recent policy directive and the IDEA task force's recommendation for the coming months. Together, we can make VA a more welcoming and equitable place for all. I yield back, Chairman Pappas.
Thank you very much, Chairman Takano. And I appreciate all of our witnesses bearing with us today. We tried to gain some efficiency by creating just one panel here. So I want to start by recognizing our first witnesses for the day for their opening statements. We have Harvey Johnson, the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Resolution Management, Diversity and Inclusion at the Department of Veterans Affairs. He's accompanied by Shamendra Paul, Executive Director for Data Governance and Analytics, as well as the Chief Data Officer in VA's Office of Enterprise Integration. Mr. Johnson, you have 7 minutes.
Good afternoon, Chairman Pappas, Ranking Member Mann, and members of the subcommittee. As you mentioned, with me today is Mr. Shamendra Paul, Chief Data Officer for the Department of Veterans Affairs. Thank you for inviting us to discuss the important bills on the agenda today and provide an update on what I will refer to as conscious inclusion, diversity, equity, and access, or conscious IDEA. The department has and continues to make great strides in this area. The aim of all the bills today are in line with our mission to ingrain conscious IDEA into the fabric of all that we do in VA. The philosopher Victor Hugo once said, "Nothing else in the world is so powerful as an idea whose time has come." And I appreciate the power of that statement, as VA is at an inflection point, which provides a remarkable opportunity for the department to proactively examine and improve IDEA. We are focused on creating a culture guided by such principles as empathy and accountability to review and rethink policies and programs that may have caused unintended barriers. Central to that effort is fostering opportunities to conduct deep listening sessions and gain the perspectives of veterans, employees, and community partners. I will take a moment to outline these efforts. VA recently concluded a secretary-directed 120-day review of how VA can incorporate conscious IDEA into the day-to-day operations. VA will issue a statement shortly on the findings and recommendations of that review. It identified and executed accomplishments to advance equity and conducted outreach to community partners to learn best practices. VA seeks to evaluate the intersectionality of systemic inequities and address institutional barriers to employee development, access, and service delivery to improve the veteran experience with a VA combined services. We strive to understand barriers to opportunity with the goal of providing everyone with the fair access to healthcare benefits and services. VA underpins its equity agenda by using a human-centered design and capturing insights of VA customers from underserved communities. This effort provides us with an understanding of bright spots and pain points in the veteran's journey as they engage the VA. The department is institutionalizing equity assessments into VA's mission and recently partnered with a federally funded research and development center to conduct a rigorous assessment of specific VA programs and services. VA is also journey mapping the employee experience from recruiting and onboarding to separation or retirement, so that we may translate those moments that matter into tangible tools and actions. VA continues to embed equity in the Veterans Health Administration's operations, benefits, and services through understanding healthcare disparities. The current VA medical package under 38 CFR excludes gender-affirming surgery. An executive memo was signed by Secretary McDonough in June of this year to start the rulemaking process to enable VA to provide a full continuum of care for veterans who are transgender. In addition, VA continues to approach the inequitable access to the benefits claims process for all veterans, to include American Indian, Alaska Native veterans due to the community's predominantly remote locations. VA consulted with tribal governments to develop partnerships that enhance access to services and benefits by veterans and their families. One notable outcome from these collaborations was the development of tribal claims clinics. The VA is working to establish a partnership with the Department of Commerce to empower minority women veterans to become entrepreneurs, and is collaborating with the Office of Women's Health to enhance women veterans' access to information about issues and programs that specifically address their concerns. Secretary McDonough centered the department's strategic vision on 4 fundamental priorities: advocacy, access, outcomes, and excellence. Access and outcomes are strategic principles that guide the department's efforts to integrate an equity agenda into VA's core mission. With regard to data, VA appreciates the importance of managing our data as a strategic asset to include improving quality, completeness, and the utility of foundational equity concerns. Secretary McDonough announced the VA data strategy, and the department remains on track to publish the implementation roadmap by the end of the calendar year. Turning to the legislation on the committee's agenda today, I'm happy to discuss where we don't offer unqualified support for certain bills. However, I want to assure the committee that that does not at all reflect a lack of full commitment to these issues. For all the bills, we stand ready to be proactive in our collaboration efforts with the committee on legislation. In closing, equal opportunity is the bedrock of our nation's democracy. We seek excellence in all we do for veterans by leveraging the strength and diversity that defines our country, veteran population, and the VA workforce. In partnership with the committee, we will continue our pursuit to uncover, analyze, and eliminate barriers to IDEA. We embrace an inclusive VA where we create with our partners and stakeholders a new future, and a VA committed to ensuring the dimension of humanity, a true appreciation of IDEA, and fairness to all in the wide range of services that we provide. My colleague, Mr. Paul, and I are happy to answer any questions you or the other members of the committee may have. Thank you for listening to me.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Johnson. I appreciate your comments and your commitment. We will now move on to our next witness. We're also joined by Marquis Fairfield, the Assistant National Legislative Director for Disabled American Veterans. Mr. Fairfield, I recognize you for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Chairman Pappas, Ranking Member Mann, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for inviting DAV to testify at this legislative hearing. DAV is a congressionally chartered veteran service organization comprised of more than 1 million members, all of whom are wartime disabled. Each year, our members gather at National Convention to adopt resolutions that comprise our legislative program, specifically the legislation and policies we will support or oppose. Based on these resolutions, my full written statement lays out our positions for all the bills on today's agenda. However, I will focus my oral remarks on just a few. The bills being considered today seek to build equity for all those who have served. We know that many veterans have faced discrimination, both during and after their military service, which has had far-reaching impacts and in many cases has created barriers preventing certain veterans from accessing their earned benefits. DAV believes it is critical to properly acknowledge every veteran who upheld their oath, affording them the dignity befitting their service and to ensure they receive the benefits and health care they've earned, particularly those who have suffered injury or illness. Mr. Chairman, DAV supports H.R. 1596, legislation that would establish a commission to identify the history of military policy regarding LGBTQ, sexual orientation, and gender identity from 1778 onward and explore its impact on active duty members and veterans from this community. The commission would be required to hold public hearings and gather testimony from veterans and service members impacted to examine the lasting effects of such policies on health, psychological well-being, finances, and employment. We support this bill in accordance with DAV's statement of policy, which calls for enhanced outreach to ensure that all disabled veterans receive all benefits they've earned, and that the American people understand and respect the needs that these veterans encounter as a result of their disabilities. If established, we urge the Commission to focus on recommendations for corrective actions that DoD and VA can take now to ensure that we assist today's veterans with the impact of discrimination or discriminatory policies. DAV supports H.R. 2385, the Justice for Women Veterans Act. This bill would require a GAO study on involuntary separations and discharges of women due to pregnancy or adoption of a child while serving in the armed forces between 1951 and 1976. The Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit in 1976 found the executive order and subsequent regulations mandating these discharges were unconstitutional and subsequently rescinded. The GAO study would help identify trends among women who were involuntarily separated under these circumstances and determine how those separations may have impacted their ability to access VA healthcare services and benefits. Another bill that DAV supports is H.R. 3930, the Voices for Veterans Act, which would expand the membership of the VA Advisory Committee on Minority Veterans to include LGBTQ veterans. The Advisory Committee on Minority Veterans considers an array of important issues related to equity that veterans in the LGBT community share. There is limited information about this population, and the bill provides an opportunity to increase understanding about their awareness, utilization of services, their unique needs and preferences, gaps in services, barriers to care, and their satisfaction with the services that they receive. DAV is also pleased to support H.R. 4845, legislation to establish an LGBTQ advisory committee. The bill would require the Secretary to consult regularly with the committee with respect to the needs of LGBTQ veterans on disability compensation, healthcare, rehabilitation services, and outreach. In addition, the committee is required to issue a report every 2 years to assess the needs of LGBTQ veterans and review the department's efforts to meet those needs and report recommendations for improvements. There are a number of issues that are unique to this population, complex in scope, and that need to be fully explored and properly addressed to ensure access to quality healthcare and services. Finally, DAV supports the Every Veteran Counts Act of 2021, legislation that would require VA to conduct and publish a survey of veterans every 10 years that contains specific information about veterans' demographic characteristics, including gender identity, sexual orientation, employment, housing, and exposure to environmental hazards. The survey would also ask about service-connected status and utilization of VA services and healthcare. Chairman Pappas, this concludes my remarks, and I welcome any questions that you or members of the subcommittee may have.
Thank you very much for your comments. Next, we'll hear from Jennifer Dain, Chief Executive Officer and Executive Director for the Modern Military Association of America. Ms. Dain, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Chairman Pappas, Ranking Member Mann, and the House Committee on Veteran Affairs and the subcommittee. I'm Jennifer Dain. I'm an Air Force veteran and the Executive Director and CEO of the Modern Military Association of America, which is the nation's largest LGBTQ+ military and veteran nonprofit dedicated to advancing fairness and equality, and we appreciate the opportunity to be here. Our organization fully supports all bills that are being presented today and believes in the criticality of all of these in regards to our current veterans and those of the past. The equality and equity lens should include every single veteran who has served in the world's greatest military. In the short time, I'd like to significantly highlight most of the bills, specifically the Commission on the Study of Stigmatization, Criminalization, and Ongoing Exclusion and Inequalities for LGBT Service Members and Veterans, the SERB Act, the IDEA Act, Every Veteran Counts Act of 2021, and expanding the advisory committee to include minority veterans that are LGBTQ+, and honoring All Veterans Act. We are significantly aware that diversity is a force multiplier, and regarding the repeal and recognize that even although 10 years has passed since the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, it was only the beginning in addressing the historical wrongdoings and undoing those for over 89 years of discrimination inflicted upon the LGBTQ military and veteran community. The history of anti-LGBTQ policies within the military has had dire consequences on sexual and gender minorities as they've experienced formal discipline, incarceration, personal and career relationship consequences, dishonorable discharges, harassment, violence, retaliation, and fear. Not only that has lasted during their time of service, but we know that's lasted far beyond that. And some of those have even ended in, unfortunately, in suicide. Even today, the policies continue to impact those, and especially those perceptions of VHA and also the VA in general. We know that the first service member ever discharged from the military was during for being LGBTQ was during the Revolutionary War. So service from LGBTQ service members goes far beyond just today. We know that since World War II into the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell in 2011, there have been 114,000 service members that were discharged either dishonorably or other than honorable. We know that the VA Secretary has made some progress to upgrade those other than honorable discharges, but those veterans need to come forward, and finding those or requesting FOIA information is really difficult. And we have been denied access to some of those FOIA reports. So some of these studies are very critical to our constituents. This also does not include those who are under investigation during Don't Ask, Don't Tell and prior policies. I want you to look at this computer screen in this hearing and know that I am one of those folks who was investigated under Don't Ask, Don't Tell. This is not a policy issue per se. It is people's lives, like my own, that have been significantly impacted by discriminatory policies, and why these bills need to be implemented, and we need to change these bills because lives are at stake. It goes beyond the dollar figure. It goes into the hearts and minds of those who served in our world's greatest military, and it goes to making sure that we take care of all those who served, and not just those who were maybe in the minority. We also understand that that doesn't include those that also still were honorably discharged and still have homosexual conduct listed on their DD-214s. So in doing and saying all this, these bills weave together a quilt of equality and justice that is much needed. And to answer some questions that Ranking Member Mann brought up about making sure the Census Bureau is on par with understanding the LGBTQ community, I would like to address that. The recent census data that was collected, there was a lot of demand for LGBTQ people not to be included in that. So codifying this into law makes sure that all people are included, regardless who is in the presidential administration, and make sure that everyone is counted, regardless of who they are and what their political stance is. So with that, I yield the rest of the time to the floor, and I'm open for any questions that are there.
Thank you very much for your testimony. And now we will turn things over to Lindsay Church, Executive Director and Co-founder of Minority Veterans of America. Lindsay, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Takano and Pappas, Ranking Member Mann, and distinguished subcommittee members. My name is Lindsay Church. I'm the Executive Director of Minority Veterans of America. We work to create belonging and advance equity and justice for over 2,500 members and advocate for the unique needs of more than 10.2 million minority veterans throughout the country and world. Thank you for the invitation to provide inputs on behalf of those communities today. On today's agenda are several bills that attempt to remedy historic harms and injustices that were inflicted upon minority service members, whose only perceived flaw was their desire to serve in the face of oppressive policies. Those policies innately force them to hide crucial aspects of their identity, effectively or actually forcing many to choose between their careers and their safety and families. We support much of the legislation presented and hope that our recommendations further increase the potential they will have to impact the millions that continue to carry the scars of criminalized and exclusionary military service. I'm a believer that personal stories can help us to best contextualize the policy work we are trying to accomplish. I'd like to share one such story with you today. Colonel Greta Kammermeyer, a Norwegian by birth, became an American citizen in 1960 at the age of 18. She promptly joined the Army Nurse Corps, serving with honor and distinction during the Vietnam War. She was frequently looked towards as an expert within her field and earned a Bronze Star as a result of her impeccable service. In 1968, Kammermeyer became pregnant with her first child and was forced to resign her commission due to a policy that prohibited women with dependents from serving. In 1972, Kammermeyer again joined the Army after the exclusionary policy was finally lifted. She served for 19 additional years before an involuntary discharge that was prompted by a disclosure of her lesbian identity during a routine security clearance interview. Kammermeyer fought the Department of Defense and became the first and one of the only service members to serve openly under Don't Ask, Don't Tell. Countless others like Kammermeyer were not afforded the opportunity to continue their service after being objectionably discharged. Like Kammermeyer, those countless veterans deserve to be recognized as the American heroes that they are. Much like their heterosexual and male counterparts, LGBTQ and women veterans served our country with honor and distinction and were willing to sacrifice their families, their lives, and their sanity to ensure boots were on the ground and the mission was being accomplished. Unlike their heterosexual and male counterparts, however, they were not regarded with the deep reverence and appreciation that they deserve. To date, both of these communities, pregnant women and LGBTQ individuals, have not received an apology from the US government for the trauma they endured under these and other ill-informed and destructive policies. We commend Representative Brownlee's relentless efforts to address this lack of equity and justice by delivering this apology through the Justice for Women Veterans Act. We also applaud Chairman Takano and Pappas for their efforts in addressing the unique needs and challenges of LGBTQ veterans, and for the painstaking efforts to ensure several veteran stories were read aloud on the chamber floor in celebration of the 10th anniversary of Don't Ask, Don't Tell's repeal. Such acknowledgements and statements from Congress and the department are essential in restoring the faith that many women and LGBTQ veterans have lost in expecting equitable and just treatment and access to earned and life-changing services and benefits. For many in my community, this was the first time they felt a deep sense of pride and appreciation for their military service. Much of the legislation being discussed today, including HRs 1596, 4845, the SERVE Act, and the VA IDEA Data Act, will allow the department to fully grasp the barriers and needs and trauma that more than 1 million of our LGBTQ identifying siblings in arms continue to endure following their service. Creating a commission to study the impacts of historic discriminatory policies and an advisory committee specifically for this community of veterans will help to address the continuing need for comprehensive data collection and will facilitate the opportunity to create an extensive and thorough understanding of the greatest challenges that our community is currently facing and may face in the future. As a nation, we innately revere military service and celebrate our veterans. It is imperative that we fully understand the extent of the sacrifices made by each person that chose to wear the uniform, with unprejudiced regard to the personal and systemic inequities that impacted them. The ranking member recently said that service members deserve enumerated benefits and services following their service to this country. We agree. We would now charge this committee and the department to ensure that equitably happens. I have repeatedly said that we must do better in serving the veteran community. Operationalizing the ranking member's remarks and ensuring that the department and this committee holds that standard is needed now more than ever. Thank you once again for the opportunity to provide testimony here today. I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you very much for your testimony. We have one further witness before we turn it over to member questions, and that's Peter Perkowski, a clinical instructor at the Veterans Legal Clinic of the Wilmer Hale Legal Service Center of Harvard Law School. Mr. Perkowski, thanks for joining us, and you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Pappas, Chairman Takano, Ranking Member Mann, distinguished members. My name is Peter Perkowski. My pronouns are he, him. I'm a clinical instructor at the Veterans Legal Clinic at the Legal Services Center of Harvard Law School. Though I was chosen to represent the clinic, my testimony reflects not just my work, but that of many people there, and I'm grateful for their input and support. My attorney colleagues at the clinic and I, and the student lawyers we supervise, represent veterans and their families across the spectrum of sex, race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, gender identity, and socioeconomic status. Our clients are veterans whom the current system does not serve well, and who therefore need significant legal assistance or advocacy. In the words of the VA's witness, Mr. Johnson, today, we know where the pain points are because we struggle against them daily. But we aim to change that. We love helping our clients, but our goals go beyond solving individual legal problems. We also promote systemic reforms that help more broadly. For that reason, we're grateful to be here to talk about ideas for structural changes that will make a difference in the lives of all veterans. As the chairman noted, on Monday, we celebrated an anniversary. 10 years ago, discriminatory laws and regulations known as Don't Ask, Don't Tell officially ended. Many in the LGBTQ community thought that the work was finished. It wasn't. For trans people, the fight for equal and open service didn't end until this year. And for the veterans harmed under regulations that criminalize their orientation and their conduct, which go back over a century, long before Don't Ask, Don't Tell, 10 years ago was only the start of the effort, not just to restore honor and dignity to their service, but also to bring them a measure of justice. What is the scope of our task? The number 14,000 is mentioned a lot. It's the estimated number of people separated under Don't Ask, Don't Tell. But the key number is 114,000, the estimated number of people separated between World War II and 2011 due to sexual orientation. Tens of thousands more transgender veterans are not included in that number. Countless more were targeted for sexual orientation and gender identity, but were separated for pretextual reasons. So many of these separations were undesirable or other than honorable, and therefore presumptively ineligible for VA benefits and services. So we have a lot of work to do. Sadly, in the decade or so that I've been working in the legal and advocacy space for the LGBTQ military community, I've learned that the current system is not fit for the purpose of doing justice for these veterans. I've learned that the current system, the committee's proposals here are important steps and welcome ones, but they are only partial solutions and more will be needed. We have offered several proposals and recommendations in my written testimony. Another important step, the VA's announcement on Monday stating that people separated based on sexual orientation, gender identity, or HIV with other than honorable characterizations presumptively meet the eligibility definition of veteran unless a regulatory or statutory bar is implicated. It's a welcome clarification, but it too is only a partial solution because the regulatory bars are a huge part of the problem. They are implicated in so many cases of LGBTQ people due to the long history of criminalizing non-heterosexual orientation and sexuality. My testimony does not address many other issues facing LGBTQ veterans: back pay, demotions, loss of retirement, other financial harms such as bonus and scholarship recoupment, and benefit exclusion due to marriage duration requirements, biased or insensitive staff at VAs, and a list of healthcare exclusions. I focus on the core issues needed to restore this veteran population to a place where they can feel not discarded, but welcome, not punished, but valued. And while my testimony focuses on LGBTQ veterans, much of it applies to other underserved populations because the VA's regulatory bars also disproportionately exclude veterans of color, veterans with mental health conditions, and veterans at risk of suicide. I could go on, but my time is running out, and I'm sure you'd like to ask us questions. So thank you for this opportunity, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Perkowski, for your testimony. We will now move on to questions, and I'll begin by recognizing myself for 5 minutes.
Chairman Pappas, Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Yes, Mr. Sablan.
Thank you. If I may, Mr. Chairman, respectfully, I ask the unanimous consent that I would speak out of turn and testify to my bill, HR 3730.
Mr. Sablan, I'm happy to yield my time to you. I'll recognize you for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I really appreciate that. Chairman Pappas, Ranking Member Mann, members of the subcommittee. And thank you very much for holding this hearing on marginalized veterans. This hearing gives me the opportunity to speak to HR 3730, my bill proposing to create a Veterans Administration Advisory Committee for Marginalized Veterans residing in the Northern Marianas, in the insular areas, and in the freely associated states. Veterans in these areas face barriers to VA services that no veteran should be required to tolerate. In the Northern Marianas, as in the freely associated states, there are no VA regional medical centers, no CBOC, and no vet center. Veterans in my district sometimes fly 3,700 miles to Hawaii or close to 6,000 miles to California to access VA services. Even receiving VA services in nearby Guam can be a major challenge and expense. I know of a veteran, a paraplegic, who couldn't fly the 30 miles from his home island of Rota to Guam because none of the air taxi aircraft could accommodate his battery-operated wheelchair. The veteran therefore had to personally charter and pay for a private boat. And since the boat's cabin was too small for his wheelchair, he had to travel the 30 miles in open Pacific Ocean water with his wheelchair lashed to the boat's deck. This is the kind of situation that departmental bureaucrats here in Washington can hardly imagine. And that is why my bill establishing a committee to instruct the Secretary of the difficulties insular area veterans face is so important. Each U.S. insular area and each of the three freely associated states would have a member representative on the advisory committee. Each would be able to describe and explain the barriers veterans face in receiving VA services. We all agree we have a duty to care for those who join the uniformed services. Yet, when a veteran must hire a boat and strap his wheelchair to the boat's deck to get to where he can obtain medical care or get to an appointment, we can probably agree we're failing in our duty. Establishing an advisory committee will not necessarily provide the every need of veterans who reside in these geographically remote areas of America, but these veterans will at least have a way to inform the lack of VA services and resources with the Secretary of Veterans Affairs. And when the Secretary is informed and learns about the barriers to the services, this insular area veterans face maybe, just maybe, change will occur and service will improve. I want to thank the Ilihi Legislatura in Guam, the Guam Legislature, for passing a resolution in support of my bill. I also want to thank the veterans of foreign wars for their support of HR 3730. And I want to give special thanks to Ms. Lindsay Church from the Minority Veterans of America, who is in fact with us this afternoon for their endorsement of my bill. And lastly, thank you. Thank you, Chairman Pappas and colleagues from both sides of the aisle who are already co-sponsors of HR 3730. And I invite those who have not yet added their names as co-sponsors to HR 3730 to please consider doing so today. Thank you, Chairman, and I thank you, sir, for yielding your time to me. I appreciate it. Please, I yield back.
Well, I appreciate your comments. Your advocacy is so important for veterans that you represent and others from outlying areas. And you have my absolute support for this legislation. I want to work with you to see that we can get it passed. With that, I'd like to turn things over to Ranking Member Mann for 5 minutes of questions.
And Chairman Pappas, if you would like to take your 5 minutes, I have no objection to that.
Oh, terrific. I'm happy to go if you don't have an objection.
Yeah, go ahead. Then I can ask my questions after that.
Okay.
That's fine.
Well, thanks very much. I'll go right into a couple of questions that I had from the outset. And, a few of our speakers here today recognized the directive that was announced by Secretary McDonough. I think this is critically important, especially coming 10 years after the wake of the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy being repealed. But we know that so many veterans continue to live in the shadow of that policy. Mr. Johnson, I'm wondering if I can ask you how this announcement fits in with the Secretary's and the President's broader efforts to cultivate a more inclusive, equitable, and diverse environment at VA.
So Chairman Pappas, thank you for that question. It absolutely does fit into what I described earlier as conscious idea. The announcement was, as you know, made this week, and it's a call to action. It's a call to action to both claimants, a person who is a veteran that has not been determined eligible for benefits, but it is also a call to action to VA claims processors and adjudicators. And the call to action to the claimants is engage your local VA. Come back to us. We will look at your character of discharge. We will look at your record. We will look at what you are eligible for under this discussion. So please come back to us. Right now, I think we approved 72% of all claims. So there's a couple of things that we are going to do. Those that do not get approved going forward, beginning in October, will get a second level review at the headquarters. The headquarters will look at that because it also gives people like myself, Mr. Shemendra Paul, and of course others, the business intel and the data around why they are denied. So it will give us those insights. We are doing a listening session. We're doing 40 listening sessions, October 5th through 6th, with the community. And that will also help influence, because we've already started the rulemaking process and we are building our final package for that. So with everything going on, we are looking at modifying M21-1, which I believe has been in the newspapers. That's the directive or regulation. The Secretary's policy has established a call for action. I believe we're making all the right steps to make sure that anyone who has served gets the benefits they're eligible for.
Well, thanks for that. And I know a number of veterans are waiting on further details here. And for folks who have felt left out or left behind, not just over the last 10 years, but during the 17 years of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, this is an important moment. One story that I have is from a veteran named Gina Palute, served in the Marine Corps. She called being a Marine the proudest accomplishment of her young life, proud to be serving her country. But less than 2 years after joining the Marines, she was involuntarily discharged, and her DD 214 states the reason is homosexuality. There's more to her story following the discharge that we probably can't get into right now, but her discharge compounded her suffering as she was unable to access education benefits, health services that really could have made a tremendous difference in the years after her service. So she's just one of the countless people that we're thinking of today. And I'm wondering if you can provide any more information on when VA anticipates to fully implement this new policy, including the requirement for individuals to receive a second review.
Absolutely. It's going to be a graduated response. And I say that because some of it has already started. Right now, we are looking at those packages with that intent. So again, my call to action to any of the veterans that are listening, and we will start to publish this, is engage your local VA. The second level review will take place October 1st, and we are going in with a rule change, second edition, because the final rule change, I should say. We've gotten 74 comments on the initial proposed rule. We've answered those. We will do the final rule change sometime after those listening sessions on the 5th and 6th, because we do want to hear from those partners, stakeholders, veterans, and others.
Well, thanks very much for those comments. And we look forward to continuing to hear more as this process moves forward. And I hope you'll work with our subcommittee and the full committee on some of the legislative efforts we have underway, which we hope to be able to explore a little bit further with you here today. So thanks for that. My time's up, so I'll turn things over to Ranking Member Mann for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Pappas. And my question is also for Mr. Johnson in many ways, following up to that. Can you elaborate on more specifics on how the VA will assess discharge statuses under the new policies announced last week? What specific guidance has gone out to the field for reviewing these discharges so far?
Thank you, Ranking Member Mann. The guidance so far is there's a Secretary's dated policy of 17 September, and the actual directive that we follow is M21-1. So I spoke with the Veterans Benefits Administration yesterday. They are in the process now of an IPT being established to take the Secretary's memo and update that, and we will start to communicate that. Some basic communications, I believe, have gone out on the website, but just know that we have communications forthcoming and how we will do that. Again, I would say the message is this is not a law change, and I want people to, and I know you know that, but I'm not sure that everybody understands. This is not a law change. What it is we are working within the confines of what we already have to look at those discharges as they relate to Don't Ask, Don't Tell, or sexual orientation. The other thing is that review I talked about, that's not just for LGBTQ+. That is for all categories of discharge, all denials. I'm not sure if that addresses where you were going with that, Ranking Member Mann.
It certainly helps. Did the Biden administration conduct any analysis for the cost of the decision, and if one was completed, what were the results? Any sense on that?
Absolutely. Thank you. We're going to get that through the rulemaking process. That is a part of the analysis that goes in. So I will tell you that that is forthcoming. We are looking at, what's going to be the capacity or the volume. I heard Mr. Perkowski say, and I have those numbers too, 100,000 for sexual orientation, 14,000 under Don't Ask, Don't Tell. Today, from talking to Veterans Benefits, we have the staff we need. We have the resources we need, but we have to look at the volume that comes in. And again, that's part of that rulemaking process for us to look at cost over.
Well, if you would, maybe let my office know as you're aware of costs and specific numbers, that would, be very helpful. Is it VA's plan to work with the DoD to assess these discharges? And I'm trying to understand why this process is being spearheaded by the VA and not DoD.
I think on this and several of the bills that we'll discuss, we will recommend, or it is our position that we do have to work with the Department of Defense. So we work with them on a daily basis. That will continue. Over.
And it's being spearheaded by equally, or VA's spearheading it, or is DoD? What's DoD's involvement so far?
I think it's an equal partnership. I mean, and some of these bills, we are starting those relationships to really discuss the bills that we've gotten pertaining to this discussion, but it's an equal partnership, because as you'll see, we are going to say that we want to collaborate with DoD on several of these bills, this being one of them.
Okay. And then a question or two on your comments or testimony on the SERV Act. Your written testimony laid out some concerns with the SERV Act, citing the complexity and a lot of technical questions. However, VA's new effort seems very similar to the SERV Act. Has VA somehow avoided the complexities and technical issues, or what's different?
So eligibility for benefits is complex, and we would just appreciate the opportunity to discuss the bill and the intended results with the committee before it takes further action on legislation. The rulemaking process is hard work, and I believe we are doing the hard work now to meet with VSOs, affinity groups, veteran listening sessions. All these sorts of things are happening now. We would just appreciate the opportunity to continue that discussion with the committee as we look at all aspects of eligibility.
Okay. Well, I have no further questions, Mr. Chairman, and yield back the balance of my time.
Well, thanks very much, and thanks for being so accommodating. With that, I'll turn things over to Chairman Takano for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Ranking Member. Thank you, Chairman Pappas. My first question is for VA. I would like to first discuss VA's new policy to extend benefits to eligible veterans with other than honorable discharges. This is an important and much needed directive. However, like all major policy changes, we need to make sure to get the details right. Similar to Chairman Pappas's SERV Act, there are complexities in determining veteran eligibility and determining the total cost of this benefit expansion. So, Mr. Johnson, does the department agree that these qualifying veterans can be identified and provided their earned benefits and services without disrupting other essential VA services and benefit programs?
Thank you, Chairman Takano, for that question. VA will ensure that all eligible veterans, particularly those affected by Don't Ask, Don't Tell, but again, all eligible veterans receive the care they need. We are committed to ensuring that anyone who served that is eligible for benefits gets the care and services they need.
Well, thank you for that. For all the other witnesses, we are still learning some of the details from the announcement. What challenges do you see VA facing as it implements this policy, and how do you recommend that it overcome them? And this is for any of the witnesses that would like the answer.
I think the biggest thing is making sure that we have the advocates, and that's why I'm always glad to see, even on this hearing, our partners, because we need those liaisons, those advocates in the field that can help communicate and promote the message. So we have IPTs established. You will hear from our Office of Public Affairs and other groups within VA. We want to make sure, that we really hit those remote locations. We want to hit those communities and populations that don't always get the message out to them.
Well, Mr. Johnson, I do want to hear from some of the organizations here, because the question was really directed at them. So maybe Ms. Dain, would you like to respond?
Absolutely. So one of the things for us, we'd love to promote this message and send it out, but we need to know the exact specifics of what this looks like and also the accessibility. So you're talking about going into rural areas. What does this look like with places that don't have internet access? How are we going to get into these communities that really need it? Or how are we going to create the trust that many veterans have lost? And we also need to do this with trauma-informed care, because we have a lot of trust issues that come from wanting to look back at the DD-214s and really telling these veterans the reality of this is the restoration of benefits only and not specifically discharge upgrades. So what does that really look like? And having open arms for those people, but I'll yield the rest of the floor because I'd love for Mr. Prokowski and Ms. Church to be able to speak as well.
Okay, about a minute and 46 seconds left. Lindsay, go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman. So echoing a little bit what Jennifer said about trust is that there's a lot of faith that's been lost in the system. And after being criminalized and pushed out of the military, it's really hard to regain that trust. VA's reputation hasn't been that strong for a while within the community, especially the LGBTQ community. So I think there's a lot of trust and faith that has to be restored with the VA and the community. I also would echo that people need to understand why it's different. Many of these veterans were already eligible for discharge upgrades before. So it's really imperative and incumbent on VA to help us understand what is different and how sending people through this process is going to change their lives when the discharge upgrade process is already available. So those two things, along with outreach, I think one of the things about the discharge characterizations is working with DOD to ensure that we recognize who these veterans are. DOD should have access to these records and have some ability to contact these individuals. That's the baseline is just being able to work between DOD and VA to ensure that we identify those folks and we find them. We're not going to find all of them, but we have the ability to find some of them.
Okay, well, Mr. Prokowski.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I see two problems. The first is that the VA's own regulations will actually make this policy change or clarification, make them ineligible for the benefit because of the regulatory bars in 38 CFR 3.12D, including willful and persistent misconduct and homosexual acts involving aggravating circumstances. Those are under the VA's definition of, those are disqualifying. And many of the LGBTQ population, the veteran population, have those disqualifying marks because their actual orientation and sexuality were criminalized at the time they were separated. So we see that problem as well as other problems with implementing this for most of the population. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that, Mr. Prokowski, and I certainly hope to hear about whether it merely will take a change of regulation or whether Congress will need to act statutorily. I yield back, Chairman Pappas.
Thank you very much. With that, I'll recognize Representative Bergman for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Johnson, HR 1596 would establish a commission studying military policy impacting LGBT service members all the way back to the Revolutionary War. This matter has a long and difficult history within our nation's military and the DoD at large. Your testimony states the DoD should, at the very least, be involved in this hearing. I agree, and I would go further saying VA should not, I repeat, not be the lead agency studying DoD policies. Do you think VA should be leading this commission, or would it be more appropriate to have DOD leading this effort with VA, shall we say, involved and in support?
Thank you, Representative Bergman. As I mentioned in my written testimony, I do believe that DOD should be lead on this in collaboration with us. Our values are in line with this bill. We do believe it's a shared responsibility. We acknowledge that we have a role. We are in no way disavowing our responsibility, but we do believe DOD has the lead on this.
Okay, and then just kind of to follow on to that, Mr. Johnson, again, as your written testimony indicates, VA is pursuing a review of the motto under the Secretary's authority. Your testimony indicates that this review should be completed by early next year. Given these efforts, do you believe that you need Congress to act to change the motto, or do you prefer we do not statutorily require such a change?
VA prefers that we do not statutorily require such a change. The Secretary has directed that a process be started with the department's veteran experience and public affairs offices to consult veterans, Congress, and key stakeholders on this issue. We expect that it will conclude, because I know you like timelines, and early 2022, the design team for the project, VA Mission Refresh, is what is proposing a completion date of January 28th, 2022. So we would ask Congress to refrain from codifying VA's mission statement while the consultative process runs its course.
Okay, just out of curiosity, sometimes, we change words in things and expect an outcome maybe in other areas. Mr. Johnson, do you think that with changing the motto, would that improve medical outcomes for veterans receiving, health care from the VA?
I think the way I would answer that is conscious idea is on the mind of all of us. And I believe that we want something to make sure it's welcoming and inclusive. And I do believe, from hearing some of our partners speak, that we want to build that trust with those we serve.
Okay, with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Representative Bergman. I'll now recognize the chair of the Health Subcommittee, Representative Brownlee, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Pappas, and thank you for having this important hearing to hear these bills. I appreciate it very, very much. So, Mr. Johnson, I heard you say in this discussion back and forth around the Secretary's announcement for our men and women who were improperly discharged through Don't Ask and Don't Tell. If I heard you correctly, that you're looking at all discharges, that, one of the bills before this committee today is my Justice for Women Veteran Act. These are women who were, as you know, discharged from the military, from their service, because they became pregnant. They were forced in some sense to be discharged. I think it's in some ways similar in the past discrimination piece, the prejudice piece, and we should make a wrong, we should right a wrong that occurred in VA's history. So, or DOD's history, I should say. But have you given any consideration to those women who were discriminated against? And these women are, women who became pregnant between 1951 and 1976.
Representative Brownlee, thank you for that question. HR 2385, this bill requires the Comptroller General to conduct a study regarding women involuntarily separated or discharged from, as you said, the armed forces during that period of 1951 to 76. We absolutely stand ready. The VA stands ready to collaborate and assist the committee, Comptroller General, GAO, DOD, and other stakeholders as necessary. So to answer your question, yes, we stand ready to collaborate on this bill.
Well, my question wasn't so much collaboration, but I appreciate that. But it seems to me that it sort of falls into a similar category in some sense. And what I have a concern, with the bill that the GAO and DOD might not be able to provide the information that we're looking for to be able to identify these women veterans who were discriminated against through that time period. And so hopefully we can, and then we will have the ability to reach out, and correct a wrong. But if we don't, it still seems to me that we should be clear so that women who were out there who were forced to be discharged because they became pregnant could access VA benefits, even though, it's pretty late in the game, probably for most of them.
Absolutely. And I'll go back to an earlier statement. Secretary McDonough is committed to ensuring anyone who served in our armed forces and is eligible for benefits should contact the Department of Veterans Affairs.
Okay, thank you.
And again, we are looking at all categories of discharges, if I didn't make that clear, not just LGBTQ or others, all categories.
Yeah, that's why I thought that maybe this, this cohort of women might fall into that category.
Absolutely. And again, my call to action and to the members of the committee and our partners is to send veterans our way.
Great.
And they also get a second review if they are denied.
Yep. Understood. So, I don't have much time left, but we just had an earlier hearing today on veteran suicide and, the need for data. And I feel like my Every Veteran Count Act is, part of that in terms of better reflection of data collection to be inclusive of all veterans who are serving our country, who have served our country, and who are now veterans. So I guess, if you could just, I've run out of time really, but if you could just concur that this is critical data for VA to be able to provide services for all of the different cohorts within our veteran population.
Mr. Kashmendra-Paul and myself concur.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me to participate today, and I yield back.
Well, thank you. We're happy to have you here. We're also happy to have a new member of the subcommittee joining us, and I'll turn things over to Representative Underwood for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Secretary McDonough in April 2021 established a task force to promote inclusivity, diversity, equity, and accessibility at the VA, and it was a really important step for the department. For far too long, many within and connected to the veteran community have felt unwelcome at the VA. The bills that our subcommittee is considering today will help right the wrongs of the past and set the VA on a course towards a more equitable and inclusive future. One bill that I'm particularly proud to co-sponsor is Chairman Pappas's SERVE Act, which would guarantee and protect VA benefits for LGBTQ+ veterans discharged from the armed forces due to their sexual orientation or gender identity. The SERVE Act would be a historic correction of a grave injustice for our LGBTQ+ service members. And building on this legislation and Monday's announcement from the VA, I introduced the Unlawful Turnaways Act with Chairman Pappas and Senator Blumenthal. My bill would comprehensively address the VA's issues with systemic unlawful turnaways of veterans, including by conducting outreach to veterans who were turned away from the VA but might be eligible for benefits. Because it's not enough to allow veterans who are unlawfully turned away from the VA to apply for and access benefits to which they might be entitled, the VA must also reach out to these veterans and make them aware of the benefits that they're eligible for. So, Mr. Johnson, what steps is VA taking to reach out to veterans who might have been unlawfully turned away by the department, including our LGBTQ plus veterans, to ensure that these veterans can apply for the benefits to which they are entitled.
Thank you, Representative Underwood. And I also want to thank you for bringing up the task force on IDEA, because that was a 120-day enterprise review across the department.
Sir, I'm sorry. Can we talk about the question about the outreach? Thank you.
Yeah, well, under that, we have identified 4 subgroups, and one of them is strategic communication. And one of the things that task force did is we stood up a Pride ERG. We have LGBTQ plus work groups. We have a number of work groups that have been established since, I want to say, June or July, because that's when we started to do those. Mm-hmm. We are looking to conduct that outreach using those groups.
Okay, but the outreach has not yet begun. This is still an internal discussion at this point.
It is. The Pride ERG stood up. They are operational. We will start to do that. It is starting to happen. Slowly.
Okay, so we look forward to hearing about the outcomes of those outreach discussions. One goal of the Secretary's task force has been promoting diversity in VA hiring. These efforts must include a specific focus on expanding Hispanic representation. Currently, Hispanic Americans make up 7.1% of the VA workforce, compared to 14.8% of the relevant civilian labor force. There are clinical consequences to this underrepresentation. At a mental health roundtable discussion that I hosted in my Northern Illinois district in August, participants told me of the barriers that our Hispanic community faces in receiving linguistically and culturally appropriate mental health care when local healthcare systems don't have sufficient Hispanic representation in their clinical workforce. I worry that similar barriers could be impacting veterans' access to mental health care given the low levels of Hispanic representation in the VA workforce. Mr. Johnson, what steps is the VA taking to increase Hispanic representation within the VHA mental health workforce?
So currently, as we speak, we have a barrier analysis work group that stood up in January. And the first population that they are studying is Hispanic, male, female, and Latino. Today, they are doing site visits in Texas right now, but they've got other facilities that they are working. We plan to wrap that up sometime this fall, but we are doing those barrier analysis work groups on that area.
Right. So barrier analysis, I think, is probably like an assessment. And so do you have a timeline for, deploying an intervention, starting the recruitment for providers, things like that?
Yes, I think that's all part of the barrier analysis. It's more than an assessment. It will also have a detailed action plan to look at, because what they're looking at now is areas where we have less than favorable representation in the VA, but we have great representation in that local area. What are we doing wrong? And also where we have favorable representation, and what are we doing right? So they are looking at the talent management pipeline, policies, and those sorts of things.
Okay. And so you think that there will be those solutions ready to deploy by the end of this year?
I absolutely do.
Great. We look forward to seeing that action plan as soon as it's available. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you very much for those questions. I do have a few additional questions of my own, and if other members do, we can do a second round. I'd just like to follow up, Mr. Johnson, on the number of questions that have been asked with respect to the directive issued on Don't Ask, Don't Tell. Clearly, I think there's a lot of interest on the subcommittee, and I'm wondering if you can arrange a member-level briefing about the directive, and if you have a thought about what point in time that might make sense to do a briefing like that.
Absolutely, Chairman Pappas. We will take that with us.
Excellent. Okay. Well, we look forward to following up on that. And with respect to the IDEA task force established in April, I'm wondering if you know when we're going to see the final report.
Chairman Pappas, I believe it's imminent any day now. It's going through final concurrence. I believe it will be out very soon. And we are excited about that action plan.
Okay. Terrific. Maybe I can turn things over to our VSOs and veteran supporters who are here. Thank you again for all of your work. I want to draw attention to a bill that I've introduced, HR 4845. It seeks to establish the Advisory Committee on LGBTQ plus veterans. Mr. Perkowski, maybe I can ask you first. You noted in your written statement that advisory committees can play an important role in helping to address the needs of marginalized populations. Can you talk a little bit about how a committee focused on LGBTQ plus veterans would affect access to VA benefits and services, and address some of the unique barriers that these individuals face?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm not unique here. My other colleagues, Lindsay and Jen, also, because we talk about this, the barriers to access are not just statutory or regulatory, they're real on the ground barriers. I mentioned in my written testimony, I believe, I had a client who walked into a VA, presented his DD-214, which said other than honorable, and the reason was homosexual acts. That person was seeking care for PTS and military sexual trauma. So he should have been eligible regardless of the other than honorable, but he was told to leave and was told he's lucky he didn't get worse. So and I know Lindsay focused on this in her written testimony, that in their written testimony, that there needs to be a focus on some cultural competence and mandatory training at VA. Our populations and our constituencies are staying away because they don't feel welcome.
Jennifer, do you have some thoughts on establishing an LGBTQ plus advisory committee and the role that could play at VA?
Absolutely. I think this would be one of the first steps of including the trust and bringing it back to some of these veterans. It would provide a significant trust building for veterans that are in this place. I want to echo what Mr. Perkowski said also in his statement, because we do believe that we know that people are turned away, especially those that should be seen are turned away just simply because they're DD-214s. We also know that creating an advisory council would provide some more insight into what needs to go into the VA, like LGBTQ care coordinators that are only like a substantial, basically a additional duty, which should be actually funded and supported in VA healthcare facilities, or at least in regional facilities where we know that there are veterans, because there are probably an estimated 2 million veterans that are LGBTQ. And what does that mean to them? So with that, I think you would provide just the first step of getting these veterans into the building and making sure that their care is just as important as everybody else's.
And Lindsay, maybe I could turn to you. I know you've advocated for keeping the advisory committee on minority veterans focused on racial and ethnic minorities. Can you talk a little bit about your thoughts there and why you believe an LGBTQ focused advisory council would be more helpful to these veterans?
Yes, sir. So I was actually formerly the Veterans Advisory Council or Committee Chair for Congresswoman Dain when the 3930 or the Voices for Veterans Act was introduced in 2019, I believe. And at the time, it was the most substantial representation that LGBTQ individuals were going to get on an advisory committee. It's my belief that in 2021, we've come far enough to understand that LGBTQ veterans are disproportionately impacted by suicide, homelessness, unemployment, substance use disorder, and many other challenges and disparities. It's important for us to be able to recognize that we need to interrogate the full experience of LGBTQ identities, especially with the history of being criminalized specifically. So it's imperative for us to be able to, if we're ever going to get to a place where we understand suicide and homelessness and unemployment from a nuanced perspective, we have to be able to look at these issues from an advisory committee level and match the Women Veterans Advisory Council that already exists and allow the Minority Veterans Advisory Council to focus on racial ethnic minorities, because the issues there are pervasive as well.
Thank you for those comments. Chairman Takano, would you like to ask any additional questions? I'll turn it over to you if you would.
I would, Chairman Pappas. I'm just amazed at the expertise we have before us today. I'm very grateful that you brought all of us together. I just will point out for the record, for General Bergman, who's not with us, but the commission is not a commission that I propose to come out of VA. It is a presidential level commission. The president would appoint 7 members. The Speaker of the House would appoint 3. 2 members from the President pro tem of the Senate, 2 members from the Secretary of Defense, and 2 members would be appointed by the Secretary of VA. Well, this is all malleable in terms of the membership, but clearly it's to rise. It's a presidential level commission, which would study the stigmatization of LGBT people going back to the Revolutionary War. Mr. Perkowski, in your testimony, you mentioned the scope of the commission's investigation should be expanded to also examine the lasting effects on access to and eligibility for benefits due to military policies and the military's actions under those discriminatory policies. Can you tell me more about your thoughts on the importance of including these two items as far as the purview of the commission?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think what I was speaking of there is sort of what we were just mentioning about the trust and the what LGBTQ veterans are carrying around with them after experiencing the hostility and the discrimination of their experience. So I have talked to many over the years, veterans from the LGBTQ population, and some of them weren't traumatized by their work. They weren't traumatized by going to war or on a deployment. They were traumatized by being investigated. They were traumatized by being witch hunted. They were traumatized by being harassed, and they were traumatized by, how they were treated on the way out when they were separated. So that's an important thing to investigate, I believe, from your commission, so that we understand the lasting effects of that trauma.
Well, thank you, Mr. Perkowski. I had intended for that to also be included within its scope. We'll examine the language more closely to make sure it does. I can tell you, I've received a phone call from somebody who was a straight person who was asked to cut his teeth on, I think he was a JAG or some sort of MP to do the witch hunting. And it's weighed on his conscience ever since. And so he was eager to be able to tell his story, to get this off of his mind. He's felt guilty about this for many decades. So I get what you're saying about the actual witch hunt, the traumatization of the witch hunt. For any of the other witnesses, do you have other suggestions for how we might alter the scope of the legislation to best capture the full scope and related effects of discriminatory military policies in the last 80 years or so?
So one of the things we do know that's underrepresented is we do know that there were straight folks that were heterosexual members that were discharged also, but whether they were in relationships with transgender individuals that was actually seen to be a heterosexual relationship or not, but they were discharged. We actually have a family that came to us that only found out that their father was discharged dishonorably because of homosexual conduct. And he was heterosexual. So a more expansive look into that, and also the incarcerations and the injustices that occurred, because we do know that is a big thing. But also going back to Mr. Perkowski's view on the significant PTS that those served of those members.
Lindsay, do you have anything to add?
I do. We provided a list of several other service areas to be examined as well in our written testimony, but also the two things is the one thing to services is to include all who were part of the uniform services. So also recognizing NOAA and public health service and ensuring that those folks are also accounted for in this commission as part of the uniform services and not just the armed services.
Well, thank you. Very good suggestion. I'm seeing the value of a legislative hearing. It's really great. We can't think of everything. The staff can't think of everything. And it's so important that we do assemble people. Marquis, anything to add before?
I would just concur with all the statements that have been mentioned here previously, that yes, more needs to be done. And with the statements that Jennifer and Lindsay and Peter have provided, that will be a good start.
Chairman Pappas, I yield back.
Well, thank you very much. And I think this has been a very productive opportunity for us to hear from our panel. And I really want to thank you all for offering your testimony, for the work that you all do individually, certainly, This is helpful to our subcommittee to figure out how to move forward legislatively, and we want to continue to work with you all in a cooperative manner to make sure these bills end up in the right place. So I think our members raised some important points and asked some important questions, and we know there are significant challenges that are faced by our veterans. We want to make sure that we are doing everything we can to create the most inclusive VA where we are connecting our veterans and those who wore the uniform of this country with all the services that they have earned. There are certainly going to be some obstacles, to that work, and I really appreciate the leadership that has been provided by Secretary McDonough and the team he has assembled at VA. He is taking important steps to ensuring that VA is becoming the welcoming, effective, equitable department that we all hope it can be. And the directive that we focused on in today's hearing, expanding eligibility for certain other than honorable discharges, is a long overdue step. It's going to provide critical services and benefits that these veterans need and deserve. And so we're going to continue to stay engaged in this work moving forward. I want to thank you, Mr. Johnson, and your team at VA for being part of this panel as well. And we look forward to working with you to implement and make permanent this particular policy change. So all members here will have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include any extraneous material, and the hearing is now adjourned. Thank you all.